That wasn't my voice. Hello. So, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Cheryl Judasic-Wiggs. I'm the co-director of the ECU Gender Studies program and chair of its board. Welcome to Gender to a T, our speaker series that helps gender-focused researchers by fielding questions from attendees about the presenter's ongoing research. Today's discussion will be on how female STEM students present themselves in personal statements. Before we get started, if you'll mute your microphones and turn off your cameras, and we're open everything up later. I'll be monitoring the chat, so feel free to type your questions there. Presentation is being recorded, as you just heard, and will be posted on social media and on the Gender Studies website. One of our presenters is Dr. Donna Kain, Associate Professor in the ECU Department of English. She teaches rhetoric, technical communication, discourse analysis, and theory and practice of new media, among many other topics. Thank you for being here. And we also have Elizabeth Reed, who is a senior psych major here at ECU. Yay, a senior. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you by muting myself.
Sure. So Dr. George could not be here because she's working with NSF right now and doing a lot of other stuff. But we worked on this project for quite a long time. And I was invited to work on it because we wanted to do some things with discourse. So you want to go to the next slide?
Okay.
There we go. So before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about why we're talking about female in this and male, because a question came up when somebody saw the presentation announcement. We're including the terms male and female because students were provided these categories to self-identify. We refer to male, female, and men, women as categories of perceptions in the findings that we discuss. And these binaries have a history in the way self-presentation in writing is often evaluated and standards that are used, which is part of what we want to get into here. So future research would include spaces for the explicit inclusion of all gender identifications. We didn't ask that, but part of what you're going to hear that we were focused on was students' perceptions of themselves and also what people thought about their writing when they didn't know people's genders. So what we did was analyzed personal statements from ECU's undergraduate research experience, biomedical engineering and simulations, imaging and modeling. This is a program that students can apply to get into. That's sort of a bridge as they're moving along in their work. And Elizabeth can tell you about the level of what the students were in their careers. We wanted to compare the content in personal statements that the students wrote to be accepted into the project, and then statements they wrote leaving the project. So we're looking at the language that they used, the linguistic features in personal statements, and the focus was really on confidence and what faculty perceived as confidence. Particularly, we were interested in women for a reason.
So I do want to start by giving you guys some statistics on women in STEM. So according to the Society of Women Engineers, about only 24% of engineering degrees were awarded to women in 2020. Now, I do also want to say that this number is going up, but it's still relatively low. So this gap may be caused by a lack of role models for women in STEM, sexism in STEM environments, and self-efficacy beliefs. Now, I really want to talk about self-efficacy beliefs because these beliefs are what informs confidence. So self-efficacy is this belief in oneself that you can perform an activity. So it's most informed by mastery experiences, which are hands-on experiences, vicarious experiences, which is watching someone from your in-group perform an activity, and verbal persuasions, which might be like verbal encouragements. So men's self-efficacy tends to be most informed by these mastery experiences, where women's self-efficacy is more informed by vicarious and verbal persuasions. Now, in writing, women are generally more characterized as being more communal and nurturing in nature. And it's been found that in writing, they tend to use language like we or together, whereas men tend to be more agentic. So being more direct or self-assured, they might use words like I or independently. Now, I also really want to emphasize that this language, it tends to depend on the context that the communication is undergoing. So in a study on pediatric personal statements, they were looking specifically at men and women and their linguistic differences. So it was found that men tended to use communal language at the same rates as women were, but they still tended to use more agentic language than women. So they were adjusting their communication style to fit into that nurturing and family-oriented environment. Now, in STEM specifically, STEM tends to value more agentic and competitive and individualistic language. So this might be a problem for women because we're conditioned to be more communal, and we avoid self-promotion. So it's actually been found that women, they tend to adjust their communication style in STEM. So they might be more modest in how they communicate their experiences and achievements, or they might actually be the opposite of that and kind of overcompensate and overhype themselves. So they feel like they fit in more and they belong more. And in another study that was looking specifically at resumes, the exact same resume, the only thing that was changed was a feminine name or a masculine name. But it was found that the resumes that had a feminine name tended to be perceived more negatively. And these applicants were perceived as having less social skills because they were women.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the methods that we used in looking at the writing that we were considering. First of all, we want to say that the National Science Foundation funded this research, and they also fund the research experience for these undergrads who were in the program. So we were working with the biomedical engineering in simulations, imaging, and modeling site at ECU. And the program goals were to broaden the participation of everybody who was in the program, no matter what their gender, race, creed, they wanted a diverse group. And the idea was to give them authentic research experiences in engineering. And the students submitted personal statements to get as part of the admission process, highlighting their personality, their goals, and their accomplishments. So previous research they had done, what they had experience in, what they wanted to accomplish in the program, and what their goals were going forward. Particularly, we were looking at whether people would go on to graduate school and things like that. So when the students started, they completed a 10-point Likert scale, and these were done pre and post their experiences in the program. And it was looking at their knowledge, their skills, and their confidence in their research abilities. So during the time that they were in this project, they attended 3 writing workshops held by the University Writing Center for their writing in general. And, one of the things to see is if there's a difference between the work that they do when they come in and the work that they do when they leave. And we were particularly interested in what differences there might be, particularly in confidence in the preliminary statements and the statements that they were writing as they left the program. So we had 55 students participated in the program from 2014 to 2019. And this was offered, I think, yearly. Is that right, Elizabeth? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a gap during COVID, but yeah.
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 16 of the students participated in this study, which isn't a huge number, but it was, always after a program, it's a little bit harder to get people to come back for participation or to respond. So there were 8 males and 8 females. So the surveys and the statements were anonymized to remove any identifying information such as their home university, and they didn't all come from ECU. These were people that were brought into this program but they could be from any university. It also removed any reference to gender and other identifiers, race, age, anything like that. We also recruited 11 faculty readers from various backgrounds in STEM, different disciplines, and we asked these faculty readers to review, each reviewer reviewed several of the personal statements, and we used a method, which I'll talk about in a minute. We also, 3 faculty readers were assigned to review each statement because we wanted to see what the range would be. And we were very careful about how we assigned those to people in the different disciplines. So one of the things that comes out of my area is we used a plus minus document response method that I've used before in some of my other research. And what we did was we gave the participants the documents, asked them to read those. Normally this is done sort of in a face-to-face method. You hand somebody a document and you ask them to note pluses or minuses. We had to do it online because of COVID. And so we went to a highlighting method, which actually worked pretty well. So the reviewers highlighted areas of the text, green for content they responded positively to for any reason, yellow for anything they found interesting, and red for content they responded to negatively for any reason. And then they could highlight any feature from individual words to sentences and paragraphs, and then they were asked to comment on their reasons for highlighting. So after that, we asked the reviewer to complete a 5-point Likert scale, rating various characteristics the reviewer perceived about the author. And we were looking at what the perceptions were based on this writing about motivation, confidence, collaboration, their overall experience with research, the tone of the document. And in that sense, it sort of, did the students understand the appropriateness, what their tone and style should be? And then we asked the faculty, would they admit or not admit a student to an academic program based on these statements? So this was really about their perceptions of the writing, not whether this was accurate or not accurate. There wasn't a right or a wrong. We were getting perceptions. So we got 639 discrete comments from the markup process. And we used a grounded theory approach. So we really looked at all of the comments that were put in. I shouldn't use the passive, that Elizabeth put in an Excel spreadsheet. And what we did was we looked through all of these and defined themes. And some of the themes that we found were confidence. Well, we were looking for confidence. So confidence, collaboration, motivation, research experience, other experience, metacognition, and writing. These were the themes that were in the comments that the assessors, that the faculty members put on these documents. So fortunately, we did find confidence. It was very interesting because a lot of the comments were about writing, right? They didn't like this word, or there was a punctuation problem, or the organization wasn't good in a particular area. It was very surprising, I think, particularly to me as a writing instructor, that there was so much emphasis placed on the writing. But it was also very interesting to see what they talked about in terms of the research experience and the other kinds of experiences people had that they talked about, and how important those might have been or not to the people looking at these statements. So there were a lot of remarks positively and negatively about people collaborating with others, mostly positive on those. But Elizabeth's going to talk a little bit more about that. And so they would decide, oh, this remark looks like confidence, or this one looks like motivation. So once we had our themes, we compared the results to determine the efficacy of the coding scheme and the reliability of individual determinations. So we discussed among ourselves divergence in the coding and agreed on statements that were coded differently. all three researchers went and coded every single one of those. And for the most part, we were on the same beam once we had our themes decided. But we did meet together on the ones that were like, we didn't agree. And we would talk about why we didn't agree. We had a linguist colleague, Mark Johnson, who is fabulous and was very, very kind and generous to serve as an outside reader and to apply the coding scheme to rate approximately, to do what we did on approximately 10% of our data. So we had an inter-rater reliability of 85%, which isn't fabulous, but it's not horrible, with our collective rating using our coding scheme. And I think, okay, so we went from there to use a, and this is also thanks to Mark hooking us up. We analyzed the statements using a Hayang's lexical complexity and syntactical complexity analyzers. Sorry, I'm having mouth problems today. To compare lexical and syntactic complexity to gender and self-reported confidence levels. So this is really, what kind of words did they use? How complex were their sentence structures? Who used more words? And those can tell you something about the way people are organizing their ideas in writing, and whether there's a difference in gender in these syntactic and lexical areas, or whether there was a difference in self-reported confidence level. Did people with more confidence use more complex syntactic sentences, or more words, more complex words, or we wanted to see if that was the case, or if people with less confidence used simpler statements.
So I do want to go ahead and say that when we were using Hayang software, there actually wasn't too many differences between men and women in their writing. So we moved on to using the LIWC 2015, which is basically this software that pulls words and it categorizes them based on different psychological like drives or emotions. But when we were using the LIWC 2015, we found that students who had a higher self-reported confidence, they used less words that were associated with positive emotion or reward, but they tended to use more words associated with power when they were more confident. So we speculate that this confidence in these students has less association with emotion-related words because STEM environments are typically more agentic and competitive in nature. They don't really value emotional language too much. So that's why there's more power. And then we also found a weak positive relationship between challenges and setbacks in self-reported confidence. So students who discuss their challenges and also how they overcame these challenges, they tended to have higher self-reported confidence. So when looking specifically at faculty perceived confidence, like Dr. Kain said a few minutes ago, none of these faculty reviewers were told the writer's gender prior to reviewing these personal statements. And also when we were doing our norming session with the faculty reviewers, they were not told the purpose of the study. They were not told that we were looking specifically at gender. But some of these faculty reviewers were actually prescribing pronouns to their writers when they were giving the reviews, which raises some interesting questions about how writing style might reveal gender. But when looking directly at confidence, faculty was pretty wary of students who appeared to be overly confident or not confident enough. And they tended to really value students who were objective and specific about their experiences, their achievements, and their skills. And then looking at women, women actually received slightly more negative feedback related to modesty. So a lot of the faculty reviewers might have used words like being overly confident or braggy or arrogant. And a lot of this negative feedback was in women's pre-programmed statements. So they might have gotten a lot of negative confidence related feedback in those pre-programmed statements because, like I said earlier, women might feel the need to overcompensate their experiences, their skills, and their achievements in STEM environments. So it might come across to a reviewer like, oh, they're talking too much about it, but it also might be that there could be slight linguistic cues that cue in the reviewer that, oh, this is a woman or this is a man. And then here are some of the examples of the feedback that faculty reviewers gave to students. Notice how they tended to like when students were objective, like in that third bullet point, would not say excelled, but use one, which is neutral and fact instead of value judgment. Or in that first bullet point, where they really emphasize being modest about their achievements, not bragging. And then I also really want to talk about building self-efficacy in the classroom, because these perceptions of STEM identity, they're actually established between first and second grade. So if we can start early, then we can get more women into STEM. So in building mastery experiences, during group work, ensure that male students aren't getting to do all the work, but also ensure that women aren't having to do all the work either. This can ensure that every student is having the opportunity to get their hands on the project. And this can kind of be enacted by going around to different groups and saying, oh, like, what's everyone's role in this project right now? Like, what's everyone doing? And then show examples of STEM professionals from a variety of backgrounds. And this extends beyond gender as well. And this is going to ensure that students from various backgrounds are going to receive kind of confirmation that STEM environments aren't only meant for one identity. And then lastly, provide students with verbal encouragements. So not only is this going to help their confidence, but it's also going to open that door of communication between teacher and student. So if a student is having problems in the class, they'll feel more comfortable coming to the teacher and addressing those needs.
After we did this and were able to sort of percolate on this a bit, and I want to say, first of all, that we have already published on this. It took us a while to get to this presentation because of some date changes last year, which may be a good thing. And there are more things to do with this. The other thing I want to say before we get into this is this experience that I had working with these three women on this project, and Mark Johnson coming in and helping us with the linguistics, was great. And when I started working with Elizabeth, I assumed she was a graduate student. She was a sophomore, but I can't tell you how great it was to work with her and feel like maybe we were mentoring in a little bit of a way, with research. And that was very exciting. And I think we need to be making sure that we're doing as much mentoring with all students, but definitely with women and women in STEM. But I started to think about a lot of other things, and that is, have we valued the attributes traditionally associated with men, masculinity, in academic and workplace self-presentation? Have we historically instructed women to write more like men to be successful? Like, oh, don't hide your light under a bushel. Make sure you talk about your accomplishments. Do this, do that, right? Have we done that? And what traits, skills, and interests are we privileging when we do that in personal statements and possibly other types of writing? And if that's true, what implications do these questions have for other underrepresented groups in STEM and other disciplines? So I guess what I'm saying is, have we not focused on so much on getting people to write one way? And have we not really asked ourselves, what should we be valuing? What should we be looking for? What should we be considering in personal statements? Why do we want them to look a certain way? And what is important? I mean, confidence, maybe, experience, but somebody who's going to be more forward about their accomplishments may actually not have been as successful as someone who is a little bit more restrained, which tends to happen with women. And it's so interesting to us that when we didn't know the gender of, we knew the gender of the students, but not when we were looking at the comments. We didn't know, those comments. but the faculty making assumptions about the gender identity of these folks when they were reading, because as Elizabeth said, they would assign a pronoun to people when they were in the comments. She did this, he did that. And they were picking up, they were being cued on something that we have trained ourselves to think about when we read personal statements. So are we eliminating potentially excellent candidates from programs if their self-presentation doesn't conform to a standard that is actually inequitable, right? So those are some of the questions I have, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about that, or any questions that you have about the research that we did. I guess Cheryl does this part.
Yes, I was unmuting myself. So are there questions? Susan?
I was actually trying to applaud. I don't have a question.
Oh,
Thank you.
you're committed now. You have to ask a question because you raised your hand. Are there any questions, any comments? Yes, Stephen.
Hi, yeah. I was just curious, specifically talking about what you were just saying, how the faculty actually assigned genders in some of those responses when they were um did um did you note the gender identity of those faculty, and did you quickly quantify those? I know you had 8 and 8, but was there anything there to queer that data?
So we did think about it, but then we decided against it because we also didn't have the gender identities of the faculty reviewers. Um, so we decided against it, but I think that would be worth looking into in the future.
We could actually find out, we could actually do something more with this data. And we didn't know who was reviewing what, though, did we? We knew who we invited, but I don't think we knew who did which paper. Is that right?
I think I might have that deep in my files somewhere.
We were trying to hide it from ourselves.
Yeah, we assigned
But
everyone
that's
a number,
Yeah.
so we couldn't figure out who was who.
That's a really excellent point, though, is what is the gender of the person reading and perceiving?
How do you see this affecting teaching? So what specifically can faculty, I know you hit on some, but what specifically can faculty do to help as we're teaching? What do we look for in ourselves?
You know, that's a conundrum I'm having, because I think what we have done in the past is tried to help students fit into a particular mold of what we think personal statements should look like. And
Mhm.
that's not on them, that's on us. Until, I'm wondering, how do we make changes that we can teach in the classroom where we're not jeopardizing students' potential? I don't want to tell people, show a lot of collaboration, show this or that, because if, the agentive language, if that's what's valued, and I tell them, well, that's only one way to go, what am I doing? I mean, I think we have to sort of maybe retrain ourselves a little bit. I'm open to thoughts on that, though.
Does anybody have suggestions or deep thoughts?
So, from a student's perspective, I feel like it comes down to opening that communication up between student and teacher. Um, and I think that will give students the room to communicate like their needs, and it also might make them feel more comfortable in the classroom. But as far as reviewers go, I haven't decided on that either, because I'm still very much, you need to show your qualifications and your passions for the discipline that you're in, but it's also students need to have autonomy over their writing and what they want to portray about themselves. So it's hard.
One thing we could do is be clearer about what we expect to see in these in personal statements. So if you're asking a student to turn in a personal statement or a letter of interest. Maybe we should be saying, we would like to hear about your, we would like to hear about how you collaborate. We would like to hear about, obviously your experience. Maybe we should be reaching out to say what we want to see, and maybe we should be talking as groups about the kind of language that we would be looking for, or what we might dismiss if we're not careful. I've been in meetings with people thinking about graduate students, and I don't know that we're always on the same page with the way we read things. So maybe we need to do that a little bit more. And I think that might go to a little bit to Grace's question about how we empower students to write statements that are authentic. Maybe they need to be a little more detailed. I noticed that I didn't think they were detailed enough. We didn't specifically ask about that, but I think if students have the room to explain a little bit more about what they mean when they say I did a lot of collaboration. It's not just I did this, I did that, but what is collaboration to them? How does it look? Not just
Right.
I collaborated on this project, but what did that mean?
Or I attended the meeting or
Mm.
something. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
There are a couple of comments in the chat here. Well, Helena had to leave, said, must go to another meeting. But Grace has, how do we empower students to write statements that are authentic and to meet the requirements of those statements?
So I actually work in the University Writing Center with Stephen. But we talk a lot about this and empowering students to kind of get across what they want to get across. So we ask questions like, well, what do you want to say? Like, what do you want to show the reviewer about yourself? But then we also try to throw in like, okay, what are your experiences? Like, why are you passionate about this field? And if they're lacking on that, we might encourage that, but we won't make them do it. We give writers control over their work.
Yes. George.
Yeah, a couple of points. What I really think this and numerous other studies show us is that we shouldn't be using highly subjective interpretations of writings of this sort to play any role whatsoever in selecting people for graduate school. We should have learned a long time ago this is not a good way to do things for all sorts of reasons, including all the reasons just given. So just as universities are finally waking up and saying we're not going to use US and News and World Report rankings anymore, we should really rethink how we do this. I mean, one little part of it is there's people who have learned how to write better than others because of that was part of their discipline. And they could write posing as a different gender if they wanted to. And that gives them an advantage when we do things like this. So that's one point. The second point is, maybe this is just frustration. I've been on a lot of committees. I've been on committees that debated what changes we need to make in ECU policies and the way we approach things, especially in the student opinion survey of instruction. And whenever anyone on the committee tried to introduce changes that were based on the biases that are clearly established by tons of research to exist in the student opinion survey, we would talk about it for a very long time, but in the end, nothing got changed. And see, I've been watching this. What you guys are calling to attention isn't news to some of us. We've known it for a very long time. I mean, initial studies involve the people performing for in Russia for the best piano player in the world. And they established early on that if they can't see who's playing the piano, women do as well as men. But if they can, the women jurors and the men jurors vote the women down, right? So this is not news. So the real problem is, how could we bring about any real change in the university? And I don't have the solution since everything I've tried so far hasn't worked. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you mentioned like if writers can write like the other gender, then maybe that gives them, or if they write better, maybe that gives them an advantage. But see, that's where I think we have a problem. Why does it give them an advantage? Gives them an advantage
why?
because that's what we might be looking for. So it's, you know, that's why it's partly on us to think about what it is we're looking for. And a lot of times, you know, I think personal statements get used to a degree, you know, does it help us figure out, okay, maybe this person didn't go to the best school, but maybe they have more, you know, commitment or something. You know, I don't know what we would use instead. I'm afraid that if we use just grades and test scores and where they went to school and the courses they took, that we would again miss out on some people. And I think I know what you're saying, George, that this isn't news to many of us, but in STEM, it's a bigger it's a bigger problem for women, and that we can show more specifically what kinds of statements we're looking at positively and what kind of statements we're questioning, and very specifically showing that people are making assumptions about gender based solely on the way something is written.
Well, sharing your frustration about a better way to choose potential graduate students, one principle I want to follow, though, is don't use something that doesn't work just because you don't know how to do it better. And that is what they say about the student opinion survey. They say, well, yeah, it's got these biases built in, but you know what, we don't know what to do. We've still got to do the survey, right? I don't know what the best way would be to decide who gets into a limited graduate program. I just know what isn't working and has all kind of bias built in. And so I would rather flip a coin in letting people in than use that biased way. I'm not joking. I would rather say randomly pick the applicants. In fact, I don't think that would be any worse than what we're doing. Maybe you could have a cutoff. You know, you have to have at least a C+ average overall where you graduated, but not even look where they graduated. A lot of us didn't graduate from great schools. A lot of us went to community college, and we were excluded from some hiring possibilities because of that. Does that? But here's something that's fun to do. Look at who published the most last year, and then look and see if it correlates with whether they went to one of the top 10 universities. Oh, well, right away, I'll tell you, it doesn't. It doesn't even come close. Talent is all over. And so first thing I would do is encourage the graduate program I was working with to simply stop requiring this. If you can come up with a substitute, fine, but just don't do something that is clearly biased.
It's a great point. Anybody have any comments? Dimitri?
Hi everyone. So this won't be a direct response, but it's just something that was kind of bouncing around in my head as I was listening to the presentation. You mentioned being involved with this work over time, and so I'm curious if you've seen greater interest in valuing collaboration and compassion and teamwork and those kinds of attributes in STEM programs. And the reason I ask is that, you know, these days I think of STEM, especially graduate training, I'm thinking of something that is like super collaborative structurally. I did my training in sociology and I worked with my advisor, maybe one of my dissertation committee members, and one or two peers, but that was it. I didn't attend lab meetings. You know, I wasn't expected to be part of this, you know, multi-role, multi-function group. And so it's just, I'm just puzzled that, you know, there continues to be this privileging, like you said, of agenting language and sort of some of these idealized masculine traits. But is the ground shifting? You know, are you seeing faculty in those disciplines kind of coming around to the idea of, wait a minute, you know, we need to run a lab with a whole bunch of people working together harmoniously. Maybe that's what we should look for.
So I haven't done anything formal with that. And a lot of these personal statements, like you said earlier, were from 2015 to 2019. So like it was over time. Um, but based on my work in the writing center and like working one-on-one with students, I have seen more discussions about collaboration among STEM students. Like if I have a chemistry student coming in writing a personal statement, like, oh, this is what I did with my lab and like with my lab partners and stuff. It's not just individualistic, but I feel like there would be a shift if we were to look at that. So that's a good question.
I'm in English, so I'm in a humanities area. And I guess you would think, and we talk a lot about collaboration, and I think we do a lot of collaborative work, but I know that depending on what you're doing, there still seems to be a privileging in some areas for the single author work. And sometimes, you see people say, oh, they have 8 publications, but 6 are all, multiple author, as if that's not as valuable. And I think some of us struggle with that, that possibly, the priority for a single authored monograph or a single authored article, um, it can be bewildering if that's not the kind of work you do. So again, there's kind of like a little box in some areas or some disciplines. And STEM is different. Who do we have here that's in a STEM area? Anybody? Because that would be a really good question for somebody in a STEM area. If they're getting more, here's another survey for us, Elizabeth. If they're more open to less individualistic language, because STEM, really, you have to have big groups to do that work.
So I'm STEM adjacent. I work in a medical school. I screen applications for prospective medical students, and so it's very different because as a profession, it's obviously focused on caring and compassion, in addition to the science. But yeah, I mean, I was here vigorously nodding my head when you talked about the single author monograph, because there's such a tension and a contradiction, I think, and I'm sure Susan will agree. In sociology as well, we have the idealized vision of the single author paper, but in STEM certainly that's almost unheard of.
I think too, one of the things that Elizabeth talked about and that showed up in our research is that that strong, that agentive language may not be about not doing work collaboratively, but being a leader, or we don't know that, but showing self-confidence was what we were looking for. If people marked those as how many times did they mark things as confident, and how often were those that kind of language. And if you're looking for people who can come in and be strong and do the research and that kind of stuff, even if they're doing collaborative work, are they standouts? That's more to look at in sort of more maybe a qualitative way. I mean, this was mixed methods, but I think there are many other questions got raised for me in this that need more research.
So which of those questions are you going to work on and publish? Not putting you on the spot or anything.
Why don't are we advertently or inadvertently promoting a particular kind of self-presentation? Are we? Because I know for sure that we have in the past, told people, make sure you say this, make sure you say that, and it's like, but what are those things that we're asking them to say? And for us, what are we looking for? And why are we looking for that? And that's not just going to be about women. That's going to be about a lot of other groups. You know, we talk about in our areas, you know, there's a lot more a lot more talk about linguistic justice, people being able to present themselves linguistically in ways they feel comfortable. Well, how does that work with us? You know, how much are we the issue?
Mhm.
I don't know if I'll publish on that, but I think it's worth looking at anyway.
Well, any other questions or comments or applause, perhaps? This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, do you have any
you.
final statement?
No. I'm glad that everyone joined today. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
This was terrific. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank
for
you for
taking the
presenting.
time.
Mhm.
Bye.